with that, we come to our next session of the day, and this is a trialogue on trends in reskilling and upskilling, the India perspective. Now, there have been a constant initiative of the government, the young population to the best. In this regard, there have been many initiatives launched by the government to see the results of skilling Indians. Now, this discussion will focus on new age skills and role of private sector in skilling India. To discuss these challenges, we have with us Mr. Syed Musheer Ahmed, founder and managing director at FinSTEP Asia. Syed will also guide and moderate this session. Welcome to the discussion, Syed. And our next panelist is Mr. Santanu Paul, CEO at TalentSprint. We welcome you to this panel, Santanu. And joining them, we have Mr. Bhowmik, Chief Business Officer at Manipal Global Education. Welcome to the show, Robin. And with that, I will hand over this session to our moderator, Mr. Syed Musheer Ahmed. Over to you, Syed.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the World FinTech Festival India edition, brought to you by FCC and UNCDP. With us today, we have two experts in the field of upskilling and reskilling, and we'll be conversing about what it means for reskilling and upskilling India's population, but also talking about how that's going to impact our future generation. So welcome, Robin and Santanu. Thank you for joining us today. As we all know, right, we have a significant young population in India, with 65% of Indians being below the age of 35. On the other hand, we also have seen over 90% of employees through an Udemy survey recently talking about the need for upskilling. Otherwise, they feel they will not have a job to hold on to. We've also seen the government of India initiating a large program under the PRIME category, which is to upskill IT professionals to increase their employability. So we're seeing a lot happening in the space. To begin with, I would like both of you to give your view on what are the key technologies you feel are reshaping industries in general, and what are the key impacts you see of these technologies for the next 10 years. Maybe we can also touch a little bit more about how you see that impacting financial services in particular. Santanu, maybe we start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Musheer, for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be part of this panel here today with SFF. Appreciate that as well. I think to your point about what's happening over a 10-year horizon, I think your question pertains to the workforce of the future. That has become a term that everybody is talking about a lot these days. Business schools are, in some sense, completely abuzz with this workforce of the future question. I think fundamentally the disruptions that are being currently, sort of wreaked upon the industry, all industries, not just financial services. I think it starts with this whole, it began in 2017, in my view, early parts, with this huge surge in interest in AI and machine learning. And subsequently, of course, it goes hand in hand with data sciences, then subsequently blockchain, financial technologies, cybersecurity, cryptocurrencies, what have you, AR, VR. So in some sense, there are about a dozen technologies that are currently sweeping the landscape in terms of transforming the way technology is done. And I think in that sense, this is a very, very turbulent and disruptive time. And disruption on one side creates chaos, on the other side creates opportunity. So the hope here is that the skill set of the future will actually take advantage of the opportunities. My personal view over a 10-year horizon, specifically to your question, is the following. That I think that, I have been thinking about this for quite some time, and my sense is that, when you get into Uber or an Ola cab, or an Uber cab, let's say, for the sake of the global audience, you see the driver essentially is at the mercy of the algorithm, right? So I say that in the future, there are three kinds of professionals on a 10-year horizon, in my view. And I call them 3 C's. The first C is you're either a person who creates an algorithm, so you're a creator of algorithms, or you are a professional person who collaborates with an algorithm, or you are somebody who complies with the algorithm, right? So if you're an Uber driver, you're complying with the algorithm, you're working for the algorithm. If you are somebody who's smart enough to build the next generation technologies and startups and companies and algorithms, then of course you're creating enormous value in your companies and startups. So that's, I think, in some sense, the most aspirational category of the future workforce, which is the creators of algorithms. In between, we have the professional class, which will morph into the collaborators. So to give you an example, if you are a great surgeon today, taking a medical example, if you're a great surgeon today, well, if you actually learn how to use robotic surgery platforms like Da Vinci, you become a better surgeon, right? So the Da Vinci platform gives you AI based, robotic arm-based controls. You can move your wrist, 360 degrees or 180 degrees, which you couldn't do in a physical world. So all of a sudden, you become, equipped with the technology, you become far more powerful as a professional, right? So that's the collaborator model. Or if you look at a Boeing 777 aircraft, I'm told that 98% of the time the commander is essentially, working with the algorithm rather than driving the algorithm, right? So in some sense, these machines are flying themselves, and the role of a professional is to supervise and perhaps take some exception handling calls, which is not a whole lot of manual activity, but certainly intellectual accountability that they have, right? So in some sense, the future, in my view, belongs to three C's: the creators, the collaborators, and the people who comply, in that order. And the one little fourth C I can add to that is a person who's got great customer intimacy. I think that's one thing that technology can't solve, is customer intimacy. A great financial advisor who can help you make choices as a customer across a whole set of financial options is still going to be very valuable, right? I mean, you can algorithmically replace that, substitute for that, but still we have human connection. So I would say the fourth C would be customer intimacy. So if you have, maybe the radiologist gets displaced by the algorithm, but the psychiatrist and the physical therapist gets much more power because of customer intimacy. So I would say that's my view of the future in terms of the workforce.
I think that's a very interesting point to place, right? Earlier today, we had Bill Winters, the group CEO of Standard Chartered, talking about how he believes that despite all human advances, an important element in that humans will play will be in building of trusted relationships, which is what, another side of the customer intimacy that you were talking about, because that is going to be critical. How do you, even if you reach a state of, largely robotic or algorithm-driven world, that trust element between two individuals is very different. I was thinking yesterday about how if in football you started having, or even cricket, you had robotic umpires, right? Especially in football, where people go and scream on your face, but the robot has no emotions to be able to react. It's just going to be very factual from that perspective. Robin, what are your views on as Santanu put it, the workforce of the future for the next 10 years? Where are you seeing that go, and what are the key technologies in your mind?
Hey, Musheer, thank you once again. And similarly, a big thanks to Singapore FinTech Festival for the invite. Well, I'm not going to repeat Shantanu's points. I think specifically on the technologies, we do often talk about all of the acronyms that, we just heard. I'll add a couple of points to that. I think, and maybe to start with, when you look at BFSI, banking, financial services in particular, we are at a very interesting tipping point because specifically post-COVID, the amount of change, and you could argue that the change will be not only BFSI, it will be across a lot of other industries as well. But I'm very closely involved with BFSI as a sector. The amount of change that we will see will be, I would say, evolutionary, moving on to revolutionary. And I'm sure we'll talk about a few things as we go forward. And as Shantanu mentioned, really on the technology front, it kind of boils down to who writes the smartest algorithm. We do a lot of work in that space. But in addition to that, what that has done is the roles that a lot of the BFSI sector and specifically banking and to an extent insurance as well are hiring for has also dramatically changed. So Shantanu mentioned customer intimacy, and what that means is fundamentally you're trying to deliver a differentiated user experience. It's all about user experience, because at the end of the day, a lot of the back-end technology has ceased to be a differentiator. Like a lot of other things, what happens is once you reach a certain level of maturity, the tech is available off the shelf. Finally, what depends is how you use it. And there are certain people who use it better than others, right? For example, when Amazon came in and talked about customer obsession, half the industry followed, saying that, look, I'm also obsessed about the customer. But unfortunately, a lot of us don't don't understand what customer obsession really means, right? Yeah. What that means now, at least in the BFSI world, is really make and break. if you don't follow your customer, life cycle, if you don't follow the money, if you don't know where the money is being spent, how it's being spent, whether it's a micro payment or whether it's a large investment, it doesn't matter. You really need to follow the money and understand the cycle, right? Because we've been talking about monetization and money at the bottom of the pyramid for many, many years. Now it's becoming a reality, right? I mean, fundamentally, even if you look at the rebound that's happening in India post the lockdown, we all started with celebrating how wonderfully well the rural economy was doing, right? Nobody was talking about, Mumbai and Delhi and Bangalore starting to spend. People were talking about a lot of the, tractors getting sold and, all of the farm equipment getting sold. So I think fundamentally there's going to be a shift in buying behavior, in spending behavior. India still happens to be a very low credit penetrated country. I think we have a huge opportunity there. And a lot of that will come in through some of the tech solutions that Santanu was referring to. In terms of the next 10 years, I fundamentally believe that, the need for multi-skilling, areas like data advocacy, for example, it's really about data and who handles data better than the other one, right? And last but not the least, when we look at some sectors, specifically banking, and I keep on referring to banking because I see this massive shift in the industry, at least in India. It really boils down to, certain roles that are more revenue impacting rather than operational, right? So more and more roles are being shifted to, to the areas where you have a direct revenue impact, sales being one of them and customer fulfillment being the other, rather than operational roles where a lot of automation is obviously replacing the traditional segments. So that's my view to start with.
Thank you both. And it's an interesting point you make, and both of you touched upon the algorithms and the way it is. So as I'm an ex-trader, right? I started off my career as a electronic trader doing point and click, and that was a time where people from the pit were moving to electronic trading in Chicago. And then while I worked for 9 years, I saw this transition post GFC in particular, where a lot more algorithms were in the market. About 40 to 50% of the volumes were driven by algorithms, and the need moved from people who can understand those nuances to having people who can build algorithms based on what they understand of the markets, to now AIs building AIs themselves. And there are quite a few models of the same. And that's an example about how 10 years ago things had changed and transformed, and we're seeing certain roles that did not exist 10 years ago when we were talking about it. If you had to find somebody who was a blockchain decentralization expert 10 years ago, that role was not there, right? In a similar way, I would say UI, UX and other roles, customer experience managers were not something that was in the focus. I think there was a bit of that on the digital front, but nothing so much. Robin, coming back to you, as we see, and as is quite evident, we are moving to this more technology-focused world where technology is coming front and center, and there are millions of people whose daily work is being disrupted. As I mentioned, over 90% of people realize that their daily work is being disrupted and they need to reskill in some senses and acquire new skills. How are you seeing education institutions enabling reskilling? And what are the challenges you're seeing with that, right? There's also a turnaround time that, when you building a syllabus and then you're bringing it, approvals, etc., private or government institution, that's a 2-3 year story. But in today's world, that 3 years gap itself is a long turnover. So how is Manipal handling it at one stage? But in general, how are you seeing education institutions enabling reskilling and the challenges thereof?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think great question. So let me take the challenges first of all, because that's something that I live, morning, evening. So 2 or 3 things that come to mind, and the first real big issue that we have, the elephant in the room in this country, is really all about employability. While we have thousands and tens of thousands of engineers graduating every year, level of employability is extremely low. Low single digits, right? Now it kind of forces you to think, why do we have the problem, right? Mm-hmm. we recently launched a School of FinTech. And as a part of the School of FinTech, when we looked at the numbers of people who were applying for this school, out of every 1,000 candidates who applied, the number of people who actually even passed the assessment was less than 50, right?
Okay.
So if you are talking about computer engineers and, it's a fundamental coding assessment that they have to do. So if 5% or less are passing a coding assessment and you're a computer engineer, it makes you think what exactly are universities teaching you these days, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of brings a need for what we call as the industry-academia connect. I think that's very, very important. And whether you do it as a part of a finishing school setup, whether you do it as a part of, maybe the final year or generally during, let's say your undergrad, I think it's fundamentally important, and that's one of the biggest challenges. And one thing that really excites me is that, some parts of this are actually addressed as a part of the new education policy. And I'm quite hopeful we'll see a big change there.
Go on, please.
Yeah. The second thing that we really, I feel, and this is something which, again, India needs to address at scale, is the whole certifications area. So to give you maybe an example, of blue-collar workers, right? I mean, what kind of a plumber turns up at your house, and scratches his head and looks at the tap and says, okay, I'm going to experiment with your tap for the next 30 minutes and try and fix it. You don't want that, right? So this is something which is a dire need across blue-collar jobs, white-collar jobs. You can, color the collar any which way you like. But fundamentally, I think that's it's a dire need in the country, right? I mean, you need deep certifications, you need deep skilling, deep knowledge, and really understanding of how the industry expects your outcomes, right? Because things are really becoming more about outcomes. It's not so much about the process. And quickly, my last point before, I know you're trying to say something. Really, we believe that, there will be a small set of institutions which are probably going to bridge this gap a lot faster than others. And that's where the whole agility part comes in. Agility does not necessarily come in from a huge legacy. Agility comes in from a deep understanding of the market and the ability to, let's say, bridge the gap between employability and the industry. Sorry, I was interrupting. You had a question.
No, you're not. I mean, I was probably the one interrupting here. I was going to ask you, right, when we're looking at the program you mentioned in terms of the Manipal School of FinTech, one of the things that is you're helping banks get appropriate talent, right? So that you're filling that gap between, so you're starting with Axis Bank, from what I understand. What I was going to ask was, how is Manipal seeing the need change from in-person versus virtual, given COVID, right? How are you seeing if I could use the term, your clients, on both sides being willing to accept that? And how are the students responding to it? Because certain skills may need in-person instruction, or whether you feel you don't need in-person instructions anymore, everything can be delivered online.
So, some parts of the answer might be counterintuitive. So just bear with me.
Sure.
This year in 2020, we didn't have much of a choice, right? So everything was virtual, everything was online, and we have very large campuses, as you know.
Yeah.
And pretty much most of our programs moved online very quickly.
Yeah.
Having gone through almost 9 months of digital ecosystems-based training, we have realized a couple of things. One is there are certain parts of let's say, a curriculum which is covered in a FinTech, which are best done in a classroom. So, for example, the project piece, where you really need a lot of ideation to be done.
Yeah.
So typically, we would still say that, the right model going forward would be blended. I don't think it's either or. It's not completely digital or it's not completely classroom. Obviously, the classroom piece has, got questioned and it's been successfully delivered over the last few months by a lot of companies extremely well.
Yeah.
The second part is, there are certain sales kind of roles. For example, I mentioned earlier, most of the banks that we work with, they're trying to reskill in high revenue impact roles, right? So there are certain kinds of roles like sales, for example, which are very difficult to completely train online. Because at the end of the day, it's not so much about the content. Content, people say content is king. I always say, the context is the kingdom, right? Yeah. So it finally depends on how you deliver it. It finally depends on, the case studies that you work on. It finally depends on your ability to network and, and kind of gather the best out of the cohort. And that's, there are certain components of that which are really best done in a physical classroom. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that going forward, the future will be predominantly online. There'll be a significant stress or significant focus on the digital ecosystems part. And I use the word ecosystem very carefully. But I do feel that the right model or one of the better models would be somewhere in the middle. It will be blended.
Thanks. Santanu, look, TalentSprint's been, if we take that conversation forward in terms of ecosystem play as well as bridging the need between large technology players who have some specific needs, especially when it comes to deep tech, versus the institutions who can provide that. That's something that you have been doing for a while and quite successfully. What have been your lessons when it comes to reskilling, and how are people responding to that, considering that the average age of the professionals that come to TalentSprint are about 7.5 years of experience?
Okay, so thank you for that. So let me just step back for a minute and try to also connect back to your earlier question that you had asked to Robin, which is that I think the whole idea of why this industry academia gap exists, and I totally second Robin's comments on many fronts in terms of the signal to noise ratio being so bad despite having degrees. All of that being true, I think Robin talked a lot about the sales and marketing professional who's front-ending the producers of the business. Yeah. I think we deal a lot more with the people who build the technology and build the platforms, right? So it's a slightly different context. But having said that, I think the real problem is not the syllabus. I think to your interesting question earlier, I think fixing a syllabus is not the issue. If you look at the syllabus of computer science in MIT in Boston, and you look at PIT in Punjab, just to take an example, which may be a hypothetical one, the syllabus in computer science will look the same. Yet the output of the people who are going through the programs are completely different skill sets of people. So syllabus is not usually the issue. The issue is methodology, right? So, for example, I have this statement that I've kind of made up now to say that the skilling is actually a verb. It's not a noun. In India, we're obsessed with nouns. Right from childhood, we're learning physics, chemistry, math. We are learning how to, and so forth, right? And then we're learning Java and Python, right? We're always talking about nouns. But skilling really is about verbs. What can you do with it, right? Can you write a research report? Can you conduct research? Can you write code? Can you design a system? Can you test it? Can you deploy it? Look at these words. They're all verbs, right? So people pay for verbs. Employers pay for verbs. They don't pay for nouns. That's one of the things I'd like to highlight, right? And therefore, ultimately, in our view, in TalentSprint's view, what is worth teaching is actually eternal. It is not a syllabus of today or tomorrow. What is worth teaching is problem solving. If people are good problem solvers, I think their market is infinite. And then the question comes, in today's context and age with technology being so disruptive and so prevalent, what are the problem solving skills we want to teach people? And here I'd like to make 3 points. One, a good problem solver today who is going to be relevant for the next 10, 20 years will have to have a critical thinking capability, a computational thinking capability, and a design thinking capability, right? So if you actually teach people to do projects with their hands, experiential learning, and build systems and solutions, even at smaller scale than what industry normally does, but in the process of building what you're supposed to build as part of your curriculum, you are exercising critical thinking faculties, you're exercising your computational thinking skills, and you're actually developing some design thinking capability. I think you want to be highly employable. Because using these things, you can solve relevant, concurrent, contemporary problems. Right? So that's really what we're trying to teach. I think fixing a syllabus is the wrong problem to work on. You have to fix the methodology. We can't be teaching people to memorize nouns and then regurgitate them in the exams. We have to tell people to build things, test things, create things, and deploy things.
I guess there's also this element, right, where a lot of this training is taking place post-education. Right? After you've completed a degree, once you start work. But I guess there is also maybe a consideration that while, as you rightly said, there may be a methodology to it. Are we going agile with, if I'm going to use some terminology, can we do an agile syllabus, right? Would that work? Are the are the frameworks from the government and UGC, etc., set up for that, right? If not, can institutions maybe add an element of agility to their offerings that they're doing, especially deemed universities, and bring in more upskilling elements to the curriculum as an add-on would be very interesting. Now, you made a and both of you have been speaking about how we're looking at technology reshaping a lot of work. We're talking a lot about BFSI as well, but we have a significant population in India, which is based in semi-urban rural population, right? 60% of our population is dependent on agriculture or related fields. And the digital penetration, as much as we've seen internet penetration almost double in the last 3-4 years, led by telcos like Reliance providing data access at the world's cheapest price, we have not necessarily had that significant increase when it comes to the gap between urban and semi-urban rural ecosystems in some senses, right? From upskilling for a technological world. So my question to both of you is, and feel free to answer the way you like it, is A, what do we need to help upskill the semi-urban rural population? If there is a need, if you don't think there is a need, what kind of skills do they need to upskill themselves with? I'm not asking about that or stating that we need a move from the rural to an urban population. We've seen the devastating impacts something like that can have in places like Japan, where the rural populations are almost ghost towns. But what can we do to prepare the 60% of India, as some people like to call it, the colloquial Bharat versus the India perspective? What can we do to upskill Bharat, and what are the key areas you see to upskill Bharat?
Would you like me to start?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, great. So I'll give you a classic example, and then I'll probably go into the version 2 of the example.
Sure.
So we've been running, for example, in Manipal, we have this business that we've been running for the last 12 years around the banking academies. We started with a relationship with ICICI Bank in the year 2008. Now, as a part of that overall initiative, in the last 12 years, we have trained close to, I would say, 20% of the overall BFSI employee base in the country, which is almost 200,000 people. And out of those 200,000 people, I think it's safe to say about 60 to 70% of them come in from rural areas.
Okay.
Now, the traditional means of delivering the content and the curriculum and the pedagogy, as we call it, so Santanu was referring to the methodology being more important. I absolutely agree. I mean, the way we have managed to kind of drive inclusion of a very large number of people into mainstream banking, for example, has been through a combination of factors. So, by just teaching them banking principles and fundamentals, it's not enough. So you need to teach them a lot of things around communication. You need to teach them a lot of soft skilling, which is becoming fundamentally important, right? We do keep hearing back from CEOs saying, I shouldn't get a mail which doesn't read properly, which should have gone to a customer. And, those kind of mails get escalated very often. And, unfortunately, it triggers the wrong kind of reaction. So, while there is a significant focus on, the industry knowledge part of it, there is equally significant focus on kind of making sure that they understand the softer parts of it. Mm-hmm. And, where the evolution is now happening is with the advent of data, right? And when I say data, it's not only structured data, it's also a lot of unstructured data. A lot of people might even talk about things like fake news and all, right?
Yeah.
How do you respond to data? How do you really respond to making decisions based on data? So the entire skilling spectrum has evolved in the last 2 to 3 years very dramatically, right? Now coming to how do you include and deliver some of these programs and maintain the quality, a large part of it is a little, it's a counterbalance, right? So on the one hand, for example, Manipal is an institute of eminence, right? Now, when you have an institute of eminence, recreating it, is not just recreating infrastructure. The infrastructure is the easy bit, right? There's a whole lot of, other things which go behind it. So do you really kind of do you think that you can recreate that kind of an institute of eminence and still deliver the same quality to the industry? Possibly no. I believe that there are 2 or 3 things that will happen going forward, which will possibly drive a little bit more inclusion, because the needs for, again, because we are talking financial services largely, the needs of the BFSI sector in India over the next 10 years, I believe, is about an additional 1.6 million jobs, right? So if you need to create an additional 1.6 million, productive employees for the next 10 years, you will not be doing it by sitting in Bangalore and Mumbai and Delhi and Chennai, right? So you need to kind of go where they are. One good news I heard and I read this morning was that apparently Reliance have announced 5G services to be launched in the middle of next year, right? I think fundamentally 5G is going to change a lot of things going forward, and I'm personally very excited about it. But more importantly, it's also, I believe that there are certain partnerships which can also enable last mile delivery. And not all of those partnerships need to be, owned by you. So you are talking about setting up a combination of a digital ecosystem combined with a physical delivery, right? Now, the physical delivery might or might not be delivered by you personally. It might be a partner. Mm-hmm. The third piece of it is equally important, I feel that with digital penetration largely being kind of focused on smartphones, mm-hmm. And not laptops so much, you keep on seeing these images of students, sitting under a tree and, trying to do their lessons, right? Which kind of invokes a lot of emotions in us. But fundamentally, the penetration of smartphones as compared to laptops is far more significant, right? Yeah. So one problem, if we can crack as an industry, is really trying to use the smartphone medium as the primary vehicle of delivery, combined with the whole, partnerships, the last mile infrastructure that I talked about, etc. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the content, a lot of the delivery mechanism, a lot of the pedagogy, etc., is not really designed for smartphone. So while there are learning management platforms, for example, where you can go in and, you can download the content and you can read it at your own pleasure, but that doesn't really give you the entire learning experience, right? So learning experience is a lot beyond that. So things like mentorship, for example, how do you bring in ongoing mentorship from the faculty, right? So I think it's a combination of multiple things, but as I said, the fact that I saw this announcement about 5G coming in next year, I think it's going to change a lot of things.
Thanks. Santanu, your views on how do we upskill Bharat and what skills does Bharat need?
Yeah, so I think this India versus Bharat story is a good metaphor. However, I would say that, given the nature of what I have been focusing on last 10 years, I'm working with the aspirational Bharat segment of the Bharat anyway, right? I mean, in some sense, our target audience are people who want to become great technologists, either in the financial service industry, in the BFSI sector, or in tech companies, or in consulting firms, or in pharma companies. So in that sense, I think one of the, I would say, great benefits of the IT revolution in India over the last 25, 30 years is that aspirationally, the problem of people wanting these jobs is solved, right? And I always say that the skill gap may be big, the aspirational gap can be bigger. And I'm sure in sales jobs, I'm sure Robin can testify to that a lot of people in India are afraid of sales targets and quotas. It's just a middle-class Indian syndrome that people want, technology jobs are aspirational for variety of reasons. So I would say that, in this area, I'm not terribly concerned about the gap that you mentioned, the so-called digital divide gap that, somehow people in the semi-urban rural sectors are languishing. I think if you look at the history of India in the last 10 years, when e-commerce first came and we said, what will happen to rural Bharat? And of course, now everybody's e-commerce is huge sales in second tier, third tier, fourth tier towns, right? And everybody's expansion strategies on e-commerce strategy of expansion is all around, Bharat and not because India is kind of getting saturated. If you look at demonetization and subsequent events, I mean, look at digital payments. I mean, very close to, I'm sure, Singapore FinTech Festival's heart. This whole digital payment revolution in India has now pretty much gone across to the rural India as well, right? So that's the second part of it. So I think in terms of education, and especially technology education as relevant to the BFSI sector, I think in many ways, I'll just give you one example. We have this amazing program with Google for women engineers, women in technology. We're producing 600 women engineers in partnership with Google across the country from underprivileged backgrounds and second-tier, third-tier colleges. And turns out these students, when they finish these programs that we are running, these boot camps, their market value and their competency levels are higher than people coming out of the top institutions in the country. I can bet the top 20 NRF ranked institutions will struggle to produce programmers of that caliber. So because the aspirational power of rural India for technology is very high, and again, all of us know that 40 to 50% of India's technology sector works for BFSI customers ultimately. So the domain intersection between BFSI and technology is anyway happening. So I'm kind of bullish that just like other sectors like e-commerce and payments and so forth, I don't see EdTech faltering at the, some big chasm exists that somehow urban guys will get the benefit and the rural guys will fall behind. That is not true for the Indian tech story for the last 30 years.
Okay, thanks. You touched a very interesting point here, which is on women and need for upskilling, or how the upskilling has helped them get a jump up in terms of the value that they get at their new jobs. How are you seeing that across the space, right? Typically, when you see engineering colleges, right, that's dominated by boys or men, as you would call it, right? So where a male-female ratio might be as high as 9 to 1 if it is a mechanical course, etc. Maybe a little better. I come from industrial engineering where our ratios were fairly okay. But you do see that gap, right? But are we seeing that change? And what else would you both say needs to be done for us to focus on technology inclusion of women in India for the upskilling? Because it has been well proven beyond multiple research that when women participate in the economy, that not only gives a boost to the economy, but it also helps overall society, because women do tend to work and contribute more to the family than men do generally, especially in the lower income side because of various factors, which I don't want to get into. So what would you say are the key elements for us to enable women to upskill, and also women when they take a break, career break, say for the birth of a child or otherwise, what are the steps that could be taken? I'm conscious of time. I think we probably have a few more minutes left. So maybe briefly, what both of you have the views. Maybe start with Santanu, because we're talking about it, and then we'll move to Robin.
Sure. No, fair enough. I think the picture on women in technology in India is more nuanced than I think what meets the eye at a surface level, right? The nuance is like this. If you look at the top tier institutions and IITs, NIT, Triple IT, and so forth, the ratio of boys to girls or men to women will be pretty dramatically bad, like you said, 9:1. You go a little further down private colleges, I'm sure even Manipal would probably be a different story, because then you start to see 70-30, 60-40, and women participation increases in private universities and colleges, even in engineering. So that's the good news, right? So the bad news, the top tier schools don't have it in terms of diversity, but the rest of them do. You go to the industry, you see the exactly same mirror image. You look at TCS, Wipro, Infosys kind of company, women will be 35% of the workforce, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. Right? But you go to the top research institutions with innovation, IP creation, you look at the IDCs, the GICs of Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook in India, again, you're 9:1, right? So in some peculiar way, we have not, it's not like we haven't solved the problem at all, but we solved for inclusion, but not for excellence, right? So in that sense, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I personally believe that, TalentSprint is known for two things. One is deep tech education, and one is women in technology, that very big flagship programs that we run that are accepted by industry as world-class. So there, I think, I personally completely subscribe to the view that you referred to, which is that the more we get women into the workforce, especially the high-end aspirational sectors, the more we will have a better economy and a better industry. And I'm very optimistic to see that given an opportunity, given the same opportunity to a young man or a young woman, we have arrived at a point in this country where the young woman is going to grab it with more success, as statistics proves to us, at least in our experience in TalentSprint. They will grab it with greater enthusiasm and greater success outcomes than their male counterparts, which I think is good news for women, but I'm not sure such a great news for men.
I'll just quickly add, before people think, why are three men talking about women empowerment? Number one, we were supposed to have a lady panelist join us who couldn't make it at the last moment. And secondly, it is very, very important for the men listening in and for the women as well, that there are male champions who can promote female entrepreneurship and promoting female inclusion, right? And it plays both ways. And so hence having male champions and following and trying to get more inclusivity for women is important. Robin, over to you with regards to your views on this.
So I'm not going to repeat what Santanu said. I broadly agree with all of his points. I think there are a couple of things. One is, while there has been an effort, and even what we see primarily, let's say in banking, there's a very significant population of women who come into banking as a preferred career. We are seeing a similar trend even in our school of FinTech because, again, for, I would say, the millennial generation, coding per se is becoming a career choice, right? I think the broader question would be, for those who might have taken a break and how do you get them back into the mainstream? And there are a couple of, use cases that we've been seeing with some of our client partners. I think we really need to be at a stage where the whole gig economy thing needs to come into mainstream employment, strategies. So far, I think the gig economy overall has been, something that, extremely innovative companies and maybe some tech startups, try to reach out to. But there are a lot of large financial institutions which are now bringing that into the mainstream, and they're kind of setting up their rewards recognitions, the entire hiring patterns around that piece of it. And the second part, I think, is really trying to get, maybe women who might have taken a break at a certain point in their career, how to get them back and how to try and, let's say, make sure that they are able to accommodate based on their other responsibilities. And one of the, I would say, semi-fortuitous things that might have happened is the fact that with work from home and online becoming such an acceptable norm going forward, I personally think that's going to offer a lot more opportunity to women who want to get back into mainstream careers, right? I think that's amazing because we just need to make sure that, it's planned as a part of your organization structure. It's planned into your existing delivery and it should not be an afterthought. And we are seeing a lot of that happening as we speak.
Thanks, Robin. Perfect timing. And I know the team is getting ready to wrap it up. So thank you both, Santanu and Robin, for wonderful views. India is a dynamic country. We have a huge population that needs not just upskilling, but reskilling. But we are setting up for that. And I feel both your institutions are doing great work. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to the Singapore FinTech Festival, FCC and UNCDP, CDF for having us. And over to the host again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists for this wonderful session again.